The cops thought they had just caught another trespasser, forcing him to pick up trash under the blazing sun while they smirked with pride. Little did they know who he really was. When a black SUV rolled out of the woods, their world turned upside down. But to understand what unfolded, we need to start at the beginning. It was one of those oppressive summer days when the air felt like a warm, stifling blanket. The cicadas buzzed relentlessly, as if they had overdosed on caffeine, and the sun blazed down as if it bore a grudge. 54-year-old Daryl Johnson didn't mind, though, with his plain t-shirt, well-worn jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. Daryl epitomized a man who relished life's simple pleasures. Short and stocky, with a head of salt and pepper hair that gave him a wise, distinguished look. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that made people take notice, even when he wasn't trying to stand out. Daryl had lived in this small, sleepy town in the heart of a conservative state for decades. It was the kind of place where people kept their curtains drawn and their noses in everyone else's business. The laws here, let's just say, weren't designed for people like Daryl. He usually kept his head down and stayed out of trouble. But today, he was simply trying to enjoy the woods. For Daryl, the forest was an escape, a refuge where he could think, clear his mind, and leave the noise of the world behind. The tall trees stood like sentinels, their shadows offering cool relief from the relentless sun. Lost in thought, Daryl stepped lightly along the trail he knew like the back of his hand. Then, out of nowhere, the wail of sirens shattered the peace. "Hey, you there!" a sharp voice barked, cutting through the cicadas' chorus. Daryl turned, calm as ever, to see a police cruiser pulling up. The officer stepping out looked like he'd been cast straight out of a bad cop drama. Officer Frank Ralston, in his mid-30s, was lean, with a grin that seemed more predatory than pleasant. He walked toward Daryl with the swagger of someone who thought he owned the place. Behind him trailed a younger officer, Chris Harlow, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Something wrong?" Daryl asked, his voice steady but curious. Frank didn't answer immediately. He was sizing Daryl up, his eyes narrowing as if he were trying to find a reason to escalate the situation. "Something wrong?" Frank finally sneered. "You're damn right there's something wrong. This here's private property, and you're trespassing. Got a permit to be wandering around?" Daryl frowned. "Private property? I've walked this trail for years and never seen a keep out sign." "Yeah, well, maybe it's time someone taught you the rules." Frank snapped, his grin twisting into something nastier. He reached into the cruiser and tossed a large black trash bag onto the ground in front of Daryl. "Let me make it real simple for you," Frank said, leaning in until their faces were almost level. "Either you pick that up and start cleaning, or I write you up for trespassing. Your call, pal." Daryl's jaw tightened, but he kept his cool. He wasn't about to give this officer the satisfaction of seeing him lose his composure. With a slow nod, he bent down, picked up the bag, and started walking the trail, Frank and Chris trailing close behind like overzealous babysitters. The task itself wasn't hard, but the humiliation was suffocating. Every step, every piece of trash Daryl picked up, felt like a small stab at his dignity. And Frank? He wasn't about to let the opportunity for a power trip pass him by. "Yeah, that's it," Frank taunted. "Pick up every little piece. Maybe next time you'll think twice about strolling where you don't belong." Daryl didn't respond. He kept his head down, focused on filling the bag, but every fiber of his being screamed for him to push back. "Not now, though. Not here." Chris, the younger officer, trailed behind Frank, his body language practically shouting discomfort. He glanced at Daryl every now and then, his eyes darting away quickly whenever Daryl looked back. The forest, once a place of peace, now felt oppressive. The trees seemed to close in, their branches like crooked fingers pointing at the absurdity of the scene. Yet through it all, Daryl remained composed. He wasn't a man to act on impulse, not when there were better ways to make a point. With each step, as the weight of the trash bag grew heavier, so did Daryl's resolve. Frank Ralston thought he was in control, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. Daryl tightened his grip on the bag, his mind focused on one thought. This wasn't over. The sun wasn't just shining. It was grilling everything in its path. Sweat trickled down Daryl's back as he bent over for what felt like the 100th time to pick up a crumpled soda can. The black trash bag was heavier now, dragging against the ground as if mocking him. Every motion was deliberate, not because he wanted to take his time, but because he refused to give Frank the satisfaction of seeing him rush. "Come on, Grandpa." Frank's voice sliced through the stillness, dripping with impatience. "You think I got all day to babysit you? Pick it up. My lunch isn't going to wait forever." Daryl straightened up slowly, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. His calm gaze locked onto Frank's, a stare that could silence a room. But Frank wasn't the type to notice subtle warnings. "You think this is the right way to handle this?" Daryl asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. Frank stepped forward, his boots crunching against the dry leaves. "You going to lecture me now? Maybe you need a reminder about how things work around here," he said, his voice growing sharper, like a knife trying to carve through Daryl's composure. Before the situation could spiral further, the sound of rustling leaves broke the tense standoff. From the tree line, a figure emerged. It was Paul, the forest ranger, a man who looked like he belonged in the woods. Rugged and weathered, with eyes that seemed to have seen it all, Paul exuded an air of quiet authority. "What's going on here?" Paul asked, his voice steady and firm. He walked toward the group, arms crossed, his boots thudding against the dirt path. Frank turned to face Paul, his grin returning as he slipped into character. "Oh, nothing much," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Just doing our civic duty. Helping this gentleman clean up the forest he decided to stroll through without permission." Paul's eyes narrowed as he glanced between Frank, Chris, and Daryl. His gaze lingered on Daryl a moment longer, as if trying to piece together a puzzle. Daryl said nothing, but his eyes met Paul's with a quiet intensity that screamed, "You know this isn't right." "This forest," Paul began, his voice deliberate, "his under state jurisdiction. Specifically, it's reserved for the governor's use. You boys have a permit to be out here giving orders?" For a split second, Frank's mask of confidence faltered. He recovered quickly, though, letting out a forced laugh. "Governor's use? Come on, old-timer. Don't make me laugh. This guy here was trespassing. We're just teaching him some respect for the rules." Paul didn't budge. "Teaching respect? Huh, you sure about that? Because it looks to me like you're the ones crossing a line." Frank's irritation bubbled over. "Look, buddy, I don't know who you think you are. I think I'm the guy asking the questions." Paul interrupted, his voice cutting through Frank's like a razor. "And I suggest you answer carefully." Frank clenched his jaw, his confidence cracking under the weight of Paul's unwavering stare. Chris, meanwhile, looked like he wanted to shrink into the trees. Before more could be said, the hum of an approaching engine silenced everyone. From the shadows of the forest emerged a sleek black SUV, its tinted windows gleaming under the relentless sun. As it rolled to a stop, the tension in the air thickened. The rest, as they say, is history.